When Disneyland was still very much in the planning stages, Walt Disney asked artist Harper Goff for some conceptual sketches and designs for a haunted ghost house attraction. Since the original idea was to place the mansion on a crooked path near the famed Main Street, USA at Disneyland, Goff's early designs suggested rural Midwestern architecture, which would have fit perfectly into the area. After some 8 years of planning, the concept of New Orleans Square was materializing. It was decided that the mansion would take on the feel of this area instead of Main Street. After all, New Orleans is known as America's most haunted city. The early drawings of the mansion were of dilapidated, broken-down buildings that truly looked haunted. Walt Disney quickly took a stance against this type of attraction and opted for a pristine exterior, as Disney legend Alice Davis explains.
He said, if you want to, you can have all the cobwebs, the dirt, whatever you want inside, but outside has to be pristine, clean.
With Walt's law firmly in the mind of the Imagineers, the plantation-style mansion was constructed in 1963.
Whenever you'd go to Disneyland, you'd see this big house there, antebellum house, and that's going to be the haunted mansion. And I said, it doesn't look like a haunted house. But that's what Walt didn't want it to look decrepit. He wanted it to look like a nice house.
This, of course, left the concept of a Western-style mansion with Victorian architecture on the cutting room floor of history. The Disneyland mansion opened on August 9th, 1969, to the thrills of millions of ghost-hunting guests. 2 years later, the second haunted mansion opened in Florida. Although Florida's mansion had a completely different architectural style than its predecessor in Anaheim, it too was pristine and clean, at least on the outside. In 1983, the Land of the Rising Sun got its very own haunted mansion, mirroring its Disney World cousin. By the end of the 1980s, famed Imagineer Tony Baxter had gained much respect in creating some of the most beloved attractions and ride franchises the theme park industry had ever seen. His creations such as Big Thunder Mountain were being duplicated at every major Disney theme park. His work on Epcot was celebrated as some of the finest family entertainment. Tony was given the task of creating an entirely new Disneyland on the European continent. Tony called some of his most trusted associates together for a blue sky meeting on this new endeavor.
We really weren't told all that much as we were asked to start to think about the possibility. What would you do if given the chance to create a dimensional Disney experience on the European continent?
Baxter encouraged his crew to think of what could be done better than the previous Magic Kingdom parks. Instead of simply copying the American attractions, as had been done for the Tokyo park, they wanted to improve or completely rethink the concepts that were to be translated into the new park. Technological advances and the different sensibilities of time and culture were the key causes for concept changes. There was also the concern of language barriers. Patrons would be coming from all over Europe and beyond. The park and attractions needed to rely much more on visuals rather than dialogue to be universally understood. These factors, and the creative vision of the crew at Walt Disney Imagineering, played a large part in the design of Phantom Manor. The European version of Disney's popular Haunted Mansion. Among those present at this secret meeting was Imagineer Jeff Burke.
It was exciting, to say the least. And we left the meeting realizing that Tony hadn't really told us a whole lot. I mean, as far as, and part of that was that he didn't know exactly what country it was going to be in. I mean, there were a number of candidates at the time, France, Spain, there were a number in the running, but it fired our imagination to think, what would be possible? What would the European audience want to see? What could we create for them that would be different than what we would do here, say, domestically?
Jeff Burke had started out at WED as a figure finisher on Country Bear Jamboree and went on to do work on America Sings with Disney legends Mark Davis and Blaine Gibson. In the late 1970s, Jeff was involved, along with Haunted Mansion pioneer Rolly Crump, in creating several breakthrough pavilions for the all-new Epcot Center in Florida. Among the pavilions that Jeff personally worked on was The Land, where he helped create the entertaining show Kitchen Cabaret. Rolly and Jeff also worked on the early concepts for the Life Health Pavilion. Sadly, that pavilion never crossed over into reality.
I feel really sad about what we had with the Life Health Pavilion, because I still think that would have been the best one of all. Jeff Burke worked with me on that. We worked very closely on it, and Steve Kirk and Scott Hennessy, great team of people. And that would have been something that I was really proud of. And what they did was that they didn't copy it, but they tried to copy it, and they did a lousy job. We actually had to ride through the human body to where they changed it into where you were made small and put into the body.
Jeff Burke was assigned as the executive designer of the Frontierland section of the park that would become Disneyland Paris, and thus got the role of show producer for Phantom Manor. With help from show writer Craig Thuralt, the pair created a detailed storyline for the ride. This storyline was firmly integrated in the overall mythology of their vision of Frontierland.
And so I put forth the idea that I could see the Haunted Mansion as being a once grand Victorian in the style of like Nob Hill, like where these either oil barons, cattle barons, steel magnates, all these wealthy men had made their homes in San Francisco. Well, throughout the West, at that same time, the greatest fast wealth that was being made was in precious ore, was gold. It was the gold rush. I could see a gold mining town in the West with this one incredible house where this guy had struck it rich, but then had spent his money as quickly as he had gained it, and then the house fell on terrible times and vacated the house. It went into a decrepit state, and boom, you had a haunted mansion on your hands.
What happened is Jeff Burke, who was the show producer for The Land, the creative over, basically what they call the show producer, they were developing a bunch of attractions, and that's really what I wanted to do. I couldn't get hired as a show designer. I just wanted to work there. I couldn't get hired as a show designer, so I took the graphic designer job and sort of weaseled my way into being a show designer for Jeff. And so I started doing storyboards and vignette sketches and gag stuff for the Haunted Mansion.
With plans to revitalize the Western motif for the Haunted Mansion, Jeff had to first convince Tony Baxter and Marty Sklar of his plan to go against Walt's vision of a pristine, clean mansion.
They asked me, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to have this run-down kind of look when the rest of the town was going to be a bustling mining town? I said, well, because we're going to be dealing with all these different languages. And although we will have a placard outside that says Haunted Mansion or whatever this ultimately will be called, the building itself has to visually read and tell you what it is the moment that you lay eyes on it. If it's just a Victorian manor, it's going to be vague. It won't really tell the tale. And they seem to buy that.
With approval from as high up as Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, Jeff and his team created a story guide for the new mansion, and it detailed the new ideas that would separate this spook house from its counterparts.
As you look off to the right, you see the bustle of the main thoroughfare that leads down to the train station for Big Thunder, the mining operation, and the actual working part of Thunder Mesa. And as you turn to the left, where the saloon is at the corner, you notice a number of dining facilities, a rather high-class, nicely paved road that well kept and clean, and freight that has been unloaded from the boats stacked nicely. But then as your eye starts moving on up, it heads toward the top of a knoll, and you make out the silhouette of a graying, aging Victorian manor.
Legend has it that decrepit and dilapidated Phantom Manor, tucked away in a lonesome corner of Frontierland, was once home to one of Thunder Mesa's founding families. Among the first settlers to strike it rich during the town's gold rush heyday, the family built the best house in town, high up on a hill overlooking the river below and out to a private cemetery on the grounds. On the day of her wedding, the daughter of the manor was jilted, and she was never seen again. The house, once the showplace of Thunder Mesa, fell into decay and ruin, becoming the sinister-looking residence that we know today as Phantom Manor. Haunted by a host of ghosts, predominantly by the evil Phantom and the benevolent bride. These restless spirits are constantly at odds within the confines of the house. Daringly curious Disneyland Paris guests are invited inside to experience frightful encounters with various ghouls, banshees, and the resident Phantom himself.
The difference between the Paris Mansion and the three traditional Haunted Mansion attractions is architecture. Phantom Manor has an Old West atmosphere with a Boot Hill cemetery next to the house, which is surrounded by stonework in ruins and what appears to be once grand landscaping.
And a gnarly and decrepit and windswept old tree starts to come into view. All of this against the backdrop of a deep black pine forest, incredibly eerie and giving an ominous kind of a feel like, do I really want to go up there with all of this action and activity and fun and all of this right here in front of me, and yet there's something kind of beckoning you, teasing you, like, come a little closer and and find out. Just step a few more feet on down this way, in a taunting kind of a manner.
An ominous presence looms high on the hill overlooking the banks of the rivers of the far west. The eerie estate of Phantom Manor teems with ghouls and ghosts from the Old West, daring you to explore its haunted hallways. Pass through the manor gates and walk upward past a dilapidated vine-covered gazebo. Climb the carriage road leading to the main house towards the manor's garden pavilion, an open-air structure with a metal roof. Listen for the whistling of the whispering wind around the iron railings. As you approach the house, watch out for a candle inside the manor that appears to be floating from one window to another. You might also spot the dark specter of the phantom, or the silhouette of the ill-fated bride. Atop the roof, 2 brick chimneys belch mysterious smoke. Ominous sounds emanate from the environs of the manor. A baying hound, a raven's squawk, or something never heard before. A shutter flaps eerily in the wind.
A very new concept was created for this mansion. The idea of a cohesive storyline and plot. For Jeff Burke, the story of love lost gives the manor an eerie tone, as opposed to the playfulness of the Disneyland mansion. There we are invited to become ghost number 1000 in a spook house for retired spirits, as foretold in the sign created by Marty Sklar, which hung at the mansion gates before its opening.
We love the grim grinning ghost, sort of fun-loving poltergeist kind of feel that the Haunted Mansion has at Disneyland. But we wanted this kind of good versus evil kind of feeling and sense of character, a bit of storyline, but not so convoluted that you had to know every character's motivation and move and maneuver. And I fear that way too much has been read into this to make it way too complicated. It's not that complicated at all. It basically is the idea of good triumphing over evil, and the ominous overtones of the phantom are actually won over by beauty, as she is represented by our young maiden.
There were so many things to consider for her, but mostly she was this girl who had this haunted look. That I think was the main focus on these things. We wanted her to seem preoccupied. You wanted to look at her face and just know that something else was going on. The story is so wonderful because she's just been there. Everywhere you go, you kind of see what's been happening. You don't really see her. And that's what makes it so mysterious. Everybody tells me she looks like me, and that was never the intention, ever. I think that's bogus. I never sat with a mirror and painted my face on her. So, Dave, let's get that squared away right now. There was this wonderful show in town called Phantom of the Opera. That was a great thing, and some of that leaked over into what we were doing because it was so wonderful and emotional, and and it just had this wonderful kind of mysterious and yet compelling feel to it. Not off-putting, but just you were just drawn in to this story of this person, and that's what Jeff wanted to capture, I think, in this attraction, and I think he did it great. I think it turned out wonderful.
An extremely popular Lloyd Webber musical, Phantom of the Opera. I loved it, I still do. And so I borrowed shamelessly. And our character, the Phantom, has a cape. What can I say? Plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery or something like that. No, I don't think that's quite how it goes, but nonetheless, yes, we borrowed big time from Phantom of the Opera. The grand gestures and much of that. In the area of music, however, we did not pull anything from the score of Phantom of the Opera. Credit for the music inside Phantom Manor goes to a gentleman by the name of John Debney, a film composer. We had kind of a fun time with Phantom Manor's soundtrack and Small World, since both of them were recorded by the London Symphony Orchestra at Abbey Road. Yes, the very same Abbey Road that we see the four Beatles crossing the street. Abbey Road Studios in London. Although there was narrative needed in the vestibule, narrative needed in the stretch room, we omitted narration on the ride. There is no voice over, no ghost host in the Omnimover, in the Doom buggies as you take the ride. We want the visual to tell the story, but we want you to be carried away on some sort of dance macabre, waltz macabre, if you will, because these vehicles move in a somewhat waltz-like fashion as they make their way through the mansion itself. And so when I went to John to ask him if he would help me with this musical assignment, and he was only too happy to oblige, and he said, what do we start with? How do we begin? And I said, well, we want to include, there's one part that cannot be omitted, and that is, of course, the four singing busts at the end, singing Grim Grinning Ghosts that Exitensio wrote.
When crypt doors creak and tombstones quake, spooks come out for a swinging wake. Happy hearts materialize and begin to vocalize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize. So that was the key there, is these ghosts just are having a ball. They're having a good time. Now don't close your eyes and don't try to hide, or a silly spook may sit by your side. Shrouded in a daft disguise, they pretend to terrorize.
Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize.
And they put our head in a vice, our neck in a vice, so we couldn't move. We could animate all we wanted, but we couldn't move our head.
You had to hold these guys, it's a projection, so you have to hold these guys very still so they wouldn't be moving and phrasing each part of the song.
As the moon climbs high over the dead oak tree, creepy creeps with eerie eyes.
I could see the inside of my mouth and my tongue and everything, you know, mugging to the playback. Right. It was a weird experience.
Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize.
We had taken the original Grim Grinning Ghost soundtrack, and a friend of mine, Marco, and I, we did another demo. There's another situation where, you know, I got involved in the music part of it, and we had taken that soundtrack And you know, if you remember back in the day, with the original version is sort of a kooky, you know, with a surf guitar sound to it a little bit, you know. We thought, because this attraction wanted to be more kind of scarier, and so we again did more of a soundtrack kind of feel to it. And that was really a cool experience, because we set up these giant speakers in front of everybody. I remember Eisner came in and we said, this is what we want to do in terms of the soundtrack for this attraction.
When the crypt doors creak and the tombstones quake,
Spooks come out for a swing and wake,
happy haunts materialize,
and begin to vocalize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize.
And again, we finished it like the night before, and we set up these things, and you know, the sound system and all that. And Eisner comes in, they stand there, and now the model builders or anybody that was working on the attraction hadn't seen any of this stuff, or hadn't heard the soundtrack before. So we blasted this thing. It was kind of cool because they were like crying. They were so happy to see and hear this whole thing come together all at the same, everybody, because when you're in the design process, you know, these people over here are designing signs, these people are designing characters, and so it's kind of like spread out all over the place. And the music actually had a wonderful kind of gelling effect on the project. And people got it. People understood the nature of the ride, and
it makes the whole ride take on this wonderful swirling, like we've been taken over. Our doom buggy is now at the mercy of the Phantom. He is in control of us as we're being swept away from the ride load belt in the grand staircase load area, where a storm crashes on the outside of the windows. We are swept on up the first staircase and on through to our adventure that lies ahead.
Continuing with the theme that beauty once lived here, Jeff and his team began to tweak familiar Haunted Mansion gags for this new version, but not straying so far as to change the mansion completely. Jeff was thereby able to retain many of the mansion's mainstays. Coming into the foyer would be semi-familiar to the Disneyland attraction. However, the original ghost host, the late Paul Frees, would be replaced with none other than the master of fright himself, the late great Vincent Price.
Where hinges creak in doorless chambers, where strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls, where candlelights flicker though the air is deathly still. This is Phantom Manor.
We actually, for Phantom Manor, had Vincent Price record the narration that Paul Frees did for the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, as well as the Haunted Mansion in Walt Disney World.
And notice this. This chamber has no windows and no doors, which offers you this chilling challenge to find a way out.
This chamber has no windows and no doors.
Mr. Price was absolutely incredible. He gave a stunning performance. He did it first in French, and then he did a subsequent performance in English. And then at the end of his recording session, he finished off with about 7 or 8 different laughs. Now, mind you, this gentleman was well into his 80s, and yet he came up with laughs, the likes of which Well, you can remember from Michael Jackson's Thriller, that phenomenal, gut-wrenching belly laugh that starts way down deep and then comes peeling all the way up and through. The only problem was that when we played back his French narration to the European audiences, they just somehow did not understand his intonation. And so we had to go to Mr. Chevalier's narration for them to understand. We tried it for a while without any narration at all, and we found it really needed a setup.
Aurez-vous le courage de franchir la porte de cette maison? Allez, ne vous faites pas prier, entrez. Qu'attendez-vous donc? N'ayez pas peur au point où vous en êtes.
So the setup basically is that Beauty once lived in this mansion, and Beauty lives here still. Beauty basically is this young lady who once lived here. She was part of the Ravenswood family. She was the young Ravenswood daughter. Her mother and father also lived in this same manor house. Now, all kinds of soap opera scenarios have surrounded this, and that was never, ever my intention or that of the writer Craig Fleming.
The artwork in the manor itself is telling a tale that is unlike the Haunted Mansion. Most of the effects have been themed to support the sad story of a bride and her vanished groom.
My favorite, I guess, is the one of her standing with a chair. We were sort of paying homage to John Singer Sargent a little bit on that one. So I thought that one turned out all right.
Doors that open into an octagonal shaped room that is lit by the dim flicker of candles placed in these gargoyle sconces overhead. Now, if this at all looks familiar to the Paris guest who has also been in Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, that is because it is an exact replica, duplicate, as close as you can get to the stretching room in Disneyland. There is a difference. This room does stretch. It works on an elevator that goes down. And there's differences. With Florida, it doesn't work quite the same way, but we wanted to go back. There's a wonderful sensation for those of you who haven't been to Paris but know the stretching room in Disneyland. There's this wonderful sensation in your feet when those portraits start to move, the walls start to stretch, and your mind is telling you one thing, your inner ear is telling you something else. Your senses are out of sync. It's like, what is really going on here? And what is even worse is the ghost host is asking you these questions. Is this room really stretching?
Is this haunted room actually stretching? Or is it your imagination?
There is a difference, however, in the stretch room, and that happens to be there are the paintings that surround you. Those of you who've been to the Haunted Mansion are, of course, very familiar with Mark Davis's paintings. These four wonderful pieces that start out benignly enough that look like the gentry that would occupy a mansion, and yet as things begin to reveal themselves, we are also exposed to what becomes, or apparently would become, their demise. In the particular case of Phantom Manor, because, as I indicated, with the vestibule and our ingenue, and the idea that we would like to incorporate this good and evil, this ominous overtone, and that good will ultimately triumph, and that we would like to embody it in some characterizations, we bring the ingenue into the stretching room. And this was done through the talents of Julie Svensson.
One of the people was, of course, Jeff, and another person was Christian Hope, who also worked on the concepts that finally made it to the stretch room paintings. And I don't remember if they went through a lot of changes, but I know Christian had roughed out some things, and then as we were working on them, we fine-tuned them and made sure that they read the way they were supposed to read. They're such universal things. You know, you take a simple portrait, basically, and then drop down and it changes into this gruesome-looking, scary, ghoulish thing. And I think that kind of is something everybody recognizes, no matter where they're from.
In each panel, we see the ingenue around the grounds of Phantom Manor as it was in its glory days. In one, she is picking roses from the garden. In another, she is wading through a little streamlet. In a third, the one that pays homage to Mark, she is in a canoe with a parasol drifting down a lazy little inlet. And in the fourth, she is on a picnic with a gentleman friend out on a grassy knoll, surrounded by fluffy clouds in the sky behind. And in each one of these, in the same way that the stretch room works before, as the narration begins to challenge your senses, then we start to see that ultimately, as she is in the canoe with the parasol, she's about to go over a waterfall or cataract. As she is out picking roses in the garden, there is actually a tombstone on just the other side, and the gardener is clawing his way up through a plot of ground. As she's wading through this little streamlet, there is up through some floating leaves, some sort of creature from underneath the depths of a watery grave. And in the picnic scene with her gentleman caller friend, we see a little stream of innocent enough ants, which are then followed by scorpions, tarantulas, and then ultimately a killer big fat diamondback rattlesnake. So it's all very much in the same tone as what Mark did with the stretch room, but it's done in the context of the story that we have begun to set up for Phantom Manor. The whole thing capped off the same way as the Haunted Mansion, with the flash of strobe lightning, the clap of thunder, and then we kept the most wonderful part of that recording session, that deep, guttural belly laugh of Vincent Price as he peals out that inimitable, evil, wonderful laugh. Then we look up and see this corpse hanging. And in this case, we see another figure pulling on a rope. Now, who could this character be? This cape-clad, mysterious, as the light of lightning flashing back and forth. And again, I get asked and queried all the time, now is that her boyfriend that's being hung? Is that the father? Is that... Folks, just chill out. It's just a story. It's just an attraction. Just go along for the ride. Enjoy yourself. Come on. It's only Phantom Manor. Let's get ready for the next part. We're about to board a doom buggy.
After leaving the stretching gallery, a carriage approaches to take us into the boundless realm of the supernatural. However, this loading area is missing things, such as the giant spider.
The doom buggy load area, to me, always looked like a set that Rod Serling should open up a sequence, a Twilight Zone on. Yeah. It had nothing to do with the Haunted Mansion. It was a fine set. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. It was like green projections and a big spider web. And if there were ever a Twilight Zone about you know, a haunted house in an amusement park, that would be a great set to have shot it on.
It is a more gracious and opulent portal of entry into the spirit world.
And we had so much fun doing that set because it looks way deeper than it is. It's all false perspective, but I took the same design from the wall treatment and I wanted an impending storm, which we achieved.
Ghouls and goblins. It is with sincere pleasure that I, Brian Summer, now take you on a journey through Jeff Burke's Phantom Manor.
Our doom buggy swerves and turns and ascends, leaving the grand staircase behind and coming into view just ahead to welcome us to the hallway and the rooms beyond is our female figure, recognizable in the face, and yet she seems somehow somewhat more mature. She is wearing what appears to be a wedding dress. She's carrying a wedding bouquet in one hand and beckoning us ahead and then welcoming or gesturing that we should move on down the hallway, which, as we're not in control of our vehicle, obviously we do.
Turning a bend, you suddenly come into a misty, cobweb-draped hallway that seems to go on forever. The bride reappears holding a candelabra, gesturing you down the hall. She appears and disappears intermittently, leaving you to wonder if the pretty young woman is real, or perhaps a woeful, vaporous apparition.
Are we really seeing this woman, this young, beautiful girl, as a bride, leading us deeper into the manor? Or is this just our own imagination.
An ornate piano mysteriously plays on its own. A raven is perched on the music holder. And through the open windows behind the piano, a gloomy landscape enshrouded by fog can be seen.
The very wallpaper on both sides of the hallway takes on an eerie sort of looking back at you quality. Now, if any of this sounds familiar to you along the lines of the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland or Disney World, it should, because this wallpaper in Phantom Manor is an exact replica of the same wallpaper that papers that hallway in both attractions in the United States, as well as the one in Tokyo. All of these sets that I've just mentioned to you, where these different experiences take place, were created, and some of these aspects recreated, such as the wallpaper, by Ackland Snow, a very, very renowned set construction and design firm that does quite a bit of work for the BBC, and we were privileged enough to work with on Phantom Manor for all of the interiors. Their attention to detail was phenomenal, and as we moved down the hallway past all of these various vignettes that we're so familiar with here in the States, they were so excited, many of them never having been to Disneyland, but having since been back either to Disney World or Disneyland, and have reported back to me saying, it looks just like what we did, which is just the exact reverse, because they duplicated what has been at Disneyland for these many years.
Moving into a circular chamber, your doom buggy turns to reveal a center table and the bluish light of a crystal ball. The head of the fortune teller, Madame Leota, appears in the ball, chanting ancient incantations from surrounding tarot cards. Could she be invoking spirits to attend the wedding reception in the Grand Hall?
One of the exciting aspects of working on a project at a new park is the input coming from many of the established parks. And as we approached the seance room and how to begin to improve on this particular area, we had received word from Disneyland that they had actually completed tests and were about to install a free-floating table without any glare on the head in the ball, no projection from the outside, but rather it would be internal. We shot footage of a French actress doing the same Madame Leota script, but translated into French, and then tried this out with the new Disneyland system with a fiber optic feed up through the table while it floated about, and much to our happiness and much to the delight of those who had never seen this effect either way, everything seemed to come off just fine. We added something a little bit different because of the wedding overlay, and a scrim piece was put around behind where normally the props would be floating in the seance room, where we showed a number of spirits and specters that were being invited on to a wedding reception, a wedding celebration by Madame Leota by the seance head in the sphere. And when all was said and done, again, our friends at Ackland Snow did themselves proud, bringing together this new technology, some new set pieces, and some of the tried and true to create a truly memorable seance circle scene.
Madame Leota's incantations, voiced by veteran actress Una Lind, are also a bit different in Paris. Her predictions are more eerie and take on a malevolent tone as she reads tarot cards and predicts ravishing bride, but a vanishing groom. Her verbiage is also delivered bilingually.
Warlocks and witches, answer this call. Your presence is wanted at this ghostly ball. Des 12 coups de minuit aux matines sonnantes, nous valserons ensemble, macabre débutante. Join now the spirits in nuptial doom, a ravishing bride, a vanishing groom.
The bride, standing midway up the staircase, woefully greets arriving guests, disembarking from a hearse at the entrance doors to the hall.
From a vestibule viewpoint, down over a grand dining hall area, we see all kinds of revelry, all kinds of party, celebratory activity taking place, and then we see it vanish again. And this is the grand ballroom. This is the same as in all other haunted mansions, the same that has been totally baffling people and making them look twice and again, and filled with wonderful sight gags and all kinds of animation and special effects and projections. And ultimately, I would say, most likely the largest use of the Pepper's Ghost effect in any one single application.
Spirits clad in formal wear enjoy a champagne feast while others waltz.
Pepper's Ghost goes way, way back. Its history is part of magician's legend and lore. And in Phantom Manor, we utilize very much the same setup as the Grand Ballroom at the Haunted Mansion. But again, we utilize the Western overlay. Our costuming is Western. Many of our guests arrive in Confederate or Union soldier outfits, as well as some of their cowboy finery. As we look a little bit closer, however, at what should be a resplendently set table, we notice that the 5-layer wedding cake has been somewhat already consumed, not as in cut slices, but rather that of vermin having nibbled away at the bottom portions, and it's tilting precariously off to one side and has turned a a rather sickly, sort of yellowy green color.
As the wind of a howling storm blows the curtains in the windows overhead, lightning flashes, revealing the silhouette of the phantom in the window above the staircase. His menacing laughter rings out over the merriment.
And if we look closely enough, up at the very edge of the far left window opening, as these curtains are flapping in the wind, we can just make out the outline of our phantom friend surveying this sad celebration taking place below. Even sadder than this presence of the phantom, however, is the forlorn woman standing at the top of the stairs in full bridal finery, complete with veil and satin dress, looking from side to side at a party which seems to go on perpetually, forever and ever, and yet this wedding ceremony will never take place. At the one end of the room is the fireplace where the gifts are stacked in front of the green flames lapping up at the hearth. At the far end of the room is the organ player piping out a macabre waltz to which the dancers spin endlessly, appearing and disappearing in all of their party finery. Most of the whole grand ballroom sequence is as we remember it from the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, Walt Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland. However, in paying attention to certain observations, maybe possibly even called pet peeves, of people's taking the ride and taking it over and over again, watching, looking for the finer points and all those little nuances and details in each one of the rides. One of the changes that was made to Phantom Manor that may completely slip by the casual observer, the first-time rider, in this particular dancing sequence is the fact that because of the Pepper's Ghost phenomenon reflecting the figures on the other side, the actual full-dimensional figures in a glass or mirror-like reflection, in all other haunted mansions, the women are leading the men in the dance. We went to special pains and efforts to reverse the figures as they really are in the animation turntables, so that when you see them from the doom buggy looking down into the party, the men are leading the ladies in the waltz macabre. So next time you take a look down at the dance floor in Phantom Manor, take note.
Without hesitation, your doom buggy pushes forward to invade the bride's sanctuary.
We leave the grand ballroom and all of its ceremony and sad bride behind, quickly turn the corner, only to come upon the bride again. How bad can this get for this poor woman? Taking a piece of Victorian lithography, a very famous print from the Victorian era, which shows a woman gazing in a mirror with some perfume bottles in the foreground, and then her reflection showing back at her that forms the face or the visage of a skeleton. One of the stylists, one of the three main stylists on the show, there was Julie Spenson, Christian Hope, and Fernando Tenedora. He completely styled this whole bride's boudoir, this bedroom. At this point, we find her looking in this mirror, and she ultimately, she's given up. We find her sobbing, looking at herself in the mirror, thinking, my God, there is nothing left for me. The clock over the mantelpiece of a fireplace off to one side is chiming midnight. It's like the witching hour is here. We see lightning through the windows to the outside. And as our doom buggy then passes out of the French doors of the manor house, we see off to one side an open grave. We see the phantom with the shovel throwing his head back in uproarious laughter, again voiced by Vincent Price with that inimitable laugh. There's a sarcophagus off to one side. On the freshly piled up dirt is this devil dog lunging forward toward our doom buggy just in time for us to swivel around, and at that very same moment we find, as the vehicle is capable of doing, we seem to be falling backward, and as we look to the right and to the left of us, we're surrounded by freshly dug earth. There's roots all around us from the pine trees overhead, and as we look closer to the side, there seems to be caskets on both sides. Caskets piled on top of each other, some of them cracking open. And the further that we fall back, the more that we see that there's hands coming out. One pushing the lid up, very much like the one casket in the lying in state room. There's that one scene in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, also at Walt Disney World. Hey, let me out of here, let me out kind of thing. The further we get down, we find the caskets are completely flung open. We find skeletons fighting over forearms, fighting over legs. All of this scene from the bride's bedroom all the way past the phantom and then down this backward descent was designed by Fernando. Phenomenal movement, very simple mechanics of these skeletons moving back and forth, but all incredibly effective because we have left the manor house and now we've entered this surrealistic sort of netherworld, which at the very bottom we come across the four singing busts. How appropriate in this world of open caskets and skeletons fighting over leg and limb and what have you. And the four singing busts in the same position as we would find them in the cemetery of Disneyland, only in this case we find them right on the edge of our grand finale sequence where we are about to enter the very gates of hell itself, in this case the most nightmarish of all finales, Phantom Canyon.
A lonely train depot appears where a skeletal station master attempts to entice you with a pair of tickets for a one-way trip to Phantom Canyon. The Phantom's hideous laughter heralds a change of scene as your doom buggy winds its way out of the catacombs and into the Old West ghost town of Phantom Canyon.
Well, now it's time for the grand finale. Welcome to my nightmare. for the ride's grand finale, what we decided that the show needed was a totally surreal, let's call it a netherworld. We turn back toward the macabre and this grand finale of visiting Phantom Canyon. Now, Phantom Canyon is a place. It is the flip side of what's up above us in Thunder Mesa. It is the hellish version of Thunder Mesa. It's sets based on many of the bank and the apothecary and the mercantile and saloon that are all topside, but to give it that otherworldly kind of feeling, Michael Valentino, who was lighting director for the entire interior as well as exterior of Phantom Manor, pulled in some extraordinary theatrical tricks and mixed some UV light that is on the buildings, is on the figures, is particularly effective shining up through the chasm of an earthquake opening, this schism running through town that is dividing Main Street and opening up buildings and splintering the wood and the boardwalk one stick at a time. He's mixed the ultraviolet light with incandescent theatrical lighting to create just the most marvelous look and feel, in addition to some special effects from Jim Mulder that caused some steam and smoke to rise and fill this otherworldly region. We have all the things that shouldn't be going on, a bank robbery in progress, a chemist in the apothecary trying out his own drugs and new concoctions and turning himself into a Jekyll and Hyde type of character. The saloon keeper wiping down the bar has an insidious grin as he looks our way and then up toward a saloon girl who has seen, I'm afraid, much better days, while they're accompanied at the piano by a rather skeletal piano player who is playing away at the keys, the same, again, music, but this time John Debney has changed the music signature into a 4/4 time. So the whole thing is pepped up into this sort of weird ragtime kind of a beat. And across the tracks and leading into the denouement of the entire scene, thrusting itself up from this earthquake schism, is a single open coffin, red velvet lined, with the lid open, a tree, a bare tree except for one raven looking directly down at it. And behind this, now for the first time, completely free of any enshrouded costume over his face, is the Phantom. This particular Phantom was created as a Sarcos figure, Sarcos 100, built from the ground up, was programmed by Doug Griffith, was the most incredibly articulated figure in the entire ride, and essentially his main objective is, in as gracious a manner as possible is reaching out to us in the doom buggy, gesturing down to this very plushly lined, luxurious coffin, and inviting us to stay forever with him, of course, in the netherworld. Just beyond a rocky opening through a cave-like door, we see the bride. Her dress is all in tatters, her body skeletal with barely a skin covering. She is backlit with a greenish sort of light, but it is strong enough to pull us on through from this reddish, purplish, magenta, hellish area so that we can escape the phantom's clutches, and we are then pulled on toward our safety, almost to the exit. Our car whips around very quickly from having been saved by the bride, and suddenly we see somebody that looks awfully familiar. It's us in the doom buggy, looking in mirrors, looking back at ourselves. Ah, okay, so we must have made it. Or, wait a minute, did we? Seated in between ourselves, me and my companion, is the phantom with his arm around each one of us, riding on down this long stone corridor, just like at Disneyland with the hitchhiking ghosts, only in this case the phantom is bound and determined to hold us in Phantom Manor until the very final mirror, when with a poof of smoke and a flash of strobe light, he's gone, and we are free then to disembark, get out of the doom buggy. And as we do approach the exit of the attraction, both sides of the corridor are dressed out as a wine cellar, very appropriately. A very nice collection, by the way, all cobweb colored. And one last little homage to the other haunted mansions is the little Leota, in French, of course, bidding us adieu and wishing us to come back, hurry back, and reminding us not to forget our death certificate.
Be sure to bring your death certificate.
We exit on through a very ornate garden potting shed, and as we come out through the doorways of the shed itself, we are faced with one last decision. A sign at the point just beyond the shed itself gives us two directions. We can either head on down the pathway along the river's edge and head back in to Thunder Mesa and back to the life in the town, or we can proceed on ahead to what was once the family plot and what the town has now turned into Boot Hill, which is filled with many of the town's finest and maybe not so fine inhabitants of makeshift as well as fancy grave sites.
Phantom Manor carries the cinematic ride concept a step further, firmly setting mood with sound and music much more dramatically than the Haunted Mansions attempted to. In a world in which theme park attraction franchises like Thunder Mountain, Tower of Terror, Space Mountain, and even Autopia are prevalent, it's very refreshing to see a new version of the beloved Haunted Mansion.